Hello. We're talking about boundaries. And so we need to establish before we do anything else exactly what a boundary is. Let's talk first of all about our own personal space. Because one of the things that we don't like very often is people that we don't know when they come too close to us. And we feel their presence as being somewhat threatening. Body language experts tell us that we have our own personal space. And it's about, generally speaking, about 3 feet. That's about a meter, all around us. And as long as people stay outside that meter distance, we can feel reasonably comfortable with them. But if a stranger steps inside and comes any closer, then we can sometimes feel threatened. Of course, there are occasions when the social norms are completely dissolved and dropped. For example, when we're on the London Underground, the tube, what we call the tube in London, and it's rush hour and it's crowded, we're all sandwiched together, pushed together like sardines in a tin. And we kind of don't feel comfortable with it. We're not happy with it, but we put up with it because we know that's the only way we're going to get to our destination, unless we wait until late in the evening when the trains are empty. That I think is what we might call our personal distance, about a meter. Social distance, when we're in a gathering of some kind on a course like you are at the moment, usually that's going to be about 2 to 3 meters, and we tend to keep that kind of distance between ourselves. In public, we would want the boundary to be slightly larger. In terms of intimate relationships, then something like half a meter or 1.5 feet would be perfectly acceptable, only though in a fairly intimate relationship, someone that you know well, like a family member or a good friend, or if you're happy with hugging somebody, for example, that would take you inside the intimate distances that are set. But generally speaking, we don't feel very comfortable if people get too close, and we see it as some kind of invasion. Okay, in terms of boundaries, there are different types. There are different types of boundaries that I think we should be aware of. I think that we can start with physical boundaries because they're the most obvious, and it's a way of taking a boundary is a way of taking care of our physical selves. It's who you want to share your body with, who you're going to engage with in intimacy, who you permit to touch in terms of even a handshake and certainly a hug. It's the area of affection and love. That's the physical kind of boundary we would put up. And so if somebody actually contravenes that boundary in any way, then we would be offended. I'd just like you to give you a thought here about children in school. And mindful awareness of boundaries should make us pretty sensitive to the kind of encroachments on boundaries that children impose upon one another, particularly through bullying. And we need, as teachers, to be very, very aware of the kind of encroachments that occur and how this really is an offence to the individual and to the self. And children have just as much right to protect their boundaries as adults do. We need to be on the lookout for cases of bullying of the physical kind. But there are, in fact, other kinds of boundaries too. There are material boundaries in the way that we take care of our finances and our possessions, and whether we want to share our finances or share our possessions with and let people use things that belong to us. There are emotional boundaries. And we've been talking about that a lot on the course in terms of taking care of our feelings, being aware that we have a right to our opinions and our wishes. We have a right to express our needs, and we need to be aware that we have every right to choose who we share our emotions and our intimate details with. And so we have to take responsibility for our emotional needs. We're also responsible for the boundaries we set in terms of the use of our time and our energy. Being in control of how you wish to spend your time and energy on others and what you want to spend it on. And finally, emotional. We've got to take care of our feelings and our opinions and our wishes and expressing our needs. So boundaries, whether they're yours or other people's, need to be respected. And you'll find this analysis in a little document that I've actually made available to you on the in your classroom. I did read to you the story of Nereander. I'm just looking for it now. Nariana, rather. And I like this story because it reminds me of how difficult it is sometimes to understand how boundaries should work. It goes like this. Long ago, a snake asked the sage to teach him the foundational principle of the spiritual life, ahimsa. Ahimsa is the non-violent stance of the spiritual seeker. He did. A year later, and Narayana again found himself approaching the same village. I wonder how my Cobra disciple is faring, and how his spiritual practice is developing, he thought to himself. And just then the sage heard a groan rising from behind a nearby tree, and it was his disciple cowering in the dirt. The cobra's body was bruised and battered. His sharp teeth were shattered, and his left eye was swollen shut. "What's happened to you?" the sage exclaimed. "Oh, Guruji," the cobra lisped through broken teeth. "You'd have been so proud of me. I took up the practice of ahimsa with great dedication. And when the boys of the village threw stones at me, I smiled." The cobra continued. "They were surprised by my new gentle demeanor and came closer carrying sticks. But I continued to smile and welcome them. They struck me and beat me. They kicked me and tied me in knots. They broke my teeth and bruised my eye. But I didn't bite or strike back." "Oh, my disciple," Narayana shook his head. "I told you not to bite. I didn't say that you shouldn't hiss." Now, as I put into the course booklet, my words are, the snake and the holy man story is one of my favorites, which it is, because the story actually gives us permission to be assertive when faced with disrespectful people or difficult situations. And at times, I practice hissing as I imagine an individual towards whom I need to be assertive. And the actual act of hissing often gives a sense of pleasure and satisfaction. There's also a humorous element that helps to reduce my anxiety. I have to confess to that, and to help me to see the offending person in a new way. And so hissing becomes a symbol of your ability to assert yourself and deal with difficult people. So in order to not be put down, attacked, or stepped on, we do need to have good boundaries. In the farming community, there's a saying, you probably know it. Good fences make good neighbors. And I live in the countryside, and I know that if a fence is not maintained, then it's quite likely that one farmer's sheep or cattle can stray onto the land of another farmer. And that can create friction. And sometimes that can turn to some form of unpleasantness. And so it's really important that the farmer maintains the security of his own land by ensuring that the hedges and the fencing is in good condition. If you own your own house, you've got exactly the same issue. A house is surrounded perhaps by a garden, and the edge of the garden marks the edge of your territory. It's your boundary. And what we tend to do in this country is we put an actual, perhaps a wooden fence up around the garden. And if the fence gets broken and you have a pet dog and it gets into the next door garden and fouls their lawn, then the next door neighbor will in fact want to tell you about it and tell you that he's not happy. And that's what personal boundaries are like. They're ways of actually establishing within ourselves what we are and what we are not prepared to put up with. And I think that's really, really important. And I think we need to look at that quite carefully. This would be a good opportunity, I think, for you to stop this video just for a moment. Come back to it after you've watched the YouTube video, which I've listed under the heading of personal boundaries, which you should find in the classroom. And it's called, well, in fact, there are two that you might like to look at. One of them is called What Are Boundaries and Why Are They Important? To watch it takes about just over a minute. And the other one is called Boundaries, Why You Need Them and How to Set Them. And that's slightly longer, then that will take about 11 minutes. So if you'd like just to pause this video or this audio recording now and keep it running, but pause it, go to YouTube and find those two videos and watch them, and then come back to me. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed those two videos and they've helped to clarify what a boundary is. In one of the previous sessions on this course, we talked about the ego and our innate need to be right in situations. That's what the ego does. It seeks to defend us, and it seeks to justify whatever we might say or do. We're not always right, but we think we are. And this need to be right can sometimes cause conflict. It causes conflict between people in all sorts of situations, in families, in schools, in business, in parliament. And it's particularly difficult when both sides want to be right. And then that creates a complete clash. And often we call that a clash of personalities or a clash of ideologies. And once you get to a situation where you're defending your belief, your rightness, then we become more and more entrenched in our view, and we become stubborn. We almost become fixated. And that's not good for human relationships. It's important to have well-defined boundaries, and not to bend to the will of other people. So there's two ways of looking at this. We can either become very rigid, or we can become very giving, very flexible, so flexible that we don't stand up for ourselves. And that can lead to unhappiness and stress, particularly if we feel that we ourselves are being bullied in any kind of situation. Boundaries help us to distinguish and determine what's right and what's not okay to us in a relationship, whether it's with friends or partners or family or whoever it might be. And we put our own boundaries in place in order to protect ourselves, and they help us to feel safe. And they actually make relationships a lot easier, because if people know where you stand on a particular issue and you know where they stand on a particular issue, no matter what it is, then they should treat you with some kind of respect, and you should treat them with respect too. But there are times when we have to allow our boundaries to be more porous. Can you think of situations where that might be the case? I think that we set boundaries because we have, it's not just to do with ego. I think it's right to set boundaries and to show that a boundary is the way that we actually love ourselves. Sometimes people get upset by our boundaries, and but the boundaries aren't meant to upset people. Boundaries are not meant to be a form of punishment. We set the boundaries for our well-being, and that's good for all people around us. In a separate, in the second part of this presentation, which is a separate video, we'll look to see how we establish those sort of boundaries in the classroom, and how we can help pupils to set mindful boundaries between each other and for each other. The problem with not setting boundaries is that we allow other people to tread on us, push us around, and bully us. And so it's really important that we do have them, and that we can then, from that position of the boundary, communicate our own needs and be able to say how we feel. And I think in the booklet, Brené Brown, I quoted as saying, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. Okay. How do we deal with boundary violations? I've actually provided you with a document which you'll find in Classroom, and it's called Dealing with Boundary Violations, and it's from a psychology website. And these are some of the ways in which the types of boundary which I've already described can be violated. Let's start with physical boundaries. And these are the things to watch out for when you're dealing with people, and you can observe this in other people talking to each other and relating to one another. These are ways people then can cross the line. You'll find these in this document. So physical boundary violations involve any invasion of the physical personal space. And you can see that in at home, in your family, at work, maybe on the course. I hope not, but maybe. So that's the first one. Emotional boundary violations involve transgressing limits that damage another person emotionally, such as name calling, insinuating that someone's worthless, stupid, or difficult, or giving unsolicited advice. These are all ways of treading on people's emotions. And so we need to be aware of those. And I think as teachers, we just need to be aware anyway. And we need to be aware that doesn't happen in schools. Spiritual boundary violations is when we impose our spiritual beliefs on other people, try to control somebody spiritually without their consent. Time boundary violations involve disrespecting agreed time limits. In other words, taking up somebody else's time when almost uninvited, if you like. It's also time boundary violations are when you know that you have to be somewhere at a certain time and away by a certain time, and you're late, or you say you have to leave early, or you stay too long at an event, overstay your welcome. And one of the forms of violation, which is obvious, is turning up late from a course, or turning up late for school, turning up late for a lesson. Sexual boundary violations are very much in the news most of the time. Currently, it's to do with athletes, and some of the young girls who have been abused by their trainers are in the news at the moment. So this is physical, emotional abuse related to sexuality, making sexual advances and so on, or even innuendos. So how do we enforce our own boundaries? Well, I think that you'll find that in this particular document, which you can refer to. But there have to be consequences. I mean, if you've got a boundary which you establish for yourself, for example, you're not happy with anybody coming in within your talking to you and being racist, and that would be a form of emotional abuse. I think that then you have the right to say, I don't want to talk about that. And if you're going to be racist, then I'm going to go. I'm going to leave the conversation. Or if somebody makes sexual advances towards you, then you might say, well, if you continue to make those advances towards me, I'm going to get up and go, and I shan't be talking to you again, or whatever the consequence is that you choose. It's sometimes quite difficult to be consistent in our boundaries. There are times when, if it's somebody you know well and they're teasing you, and you're happy and you're perhaps playful, where your boundary becomes more porous. But you have to be careful, because that you don't allow it to be too porous, and on the other hand, too rigid, depending on who you're with. But nevertheless, you must have in your mind that not only that you have boundaries, but you have to be aware of how you're going to deal with any infringement. And if somebody pushes back and says, for example, who refuse to respect your boundaries, then you mustn't give up. You've got to stand up for yourself. and be assertive. That's really important. In the psychology document, the example they give is, I know you're upset, but I still need you to respect my boundaries, and I won't meet with you if you don't respect my personal space. So you have to have, if you like, a readiness when it comes to enforcing your own boundary limitations, and be firm about it. That's important. And you will find very quickly, particularly in families, that if you establish a boundary as you grow older, people that are older than you sometimes still regard you as a child. And even though you're in your 20s or 30s or even 40s or even 50s sometimes, and they will be forgetful, they still see you as a child. Well, that doesn't mean to say that you've got to actually give in to that. You have to remind them, you're not a child anymore. And that's important to do. You have to say to them, I've said to you before that I don't feel comfortable with whatever it is, and reinforce it consistently and possibly almost repetitively with some people. You have to keep saying, I don't like that, don't want you crossing that line, and express what that violation is if people have forgotten. And if somebody really carries on regardless of your stance on a particular subject, and then they keep pushing the boundaries, then there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't break off relationship with them completely. You'll find on the list of reading materials that are in Classroom on this subject, quite an interesting article from a magazine that was written some time ago now. I've been referring to this for several years, by Oprah Winfrey, and it's called Setting Boundaries. She wrote it for women, but I find it quite useful for me too to read. And I'll give you some examples. She starts off by saying that there are certain steps towards setting boundaries. I'm only going to look at the first part of this because you can read it for yourself. But she talks about being mindful of your own boundaries. She calls it self-awareness, which is the same as mindfulness. And she says the first step in learning to set boundaries is self-awareness. For example, pay close attention to the situations when you lose energy, feel a knot in your stomach, or want to cry. Identifying where you need more space, self-respect, energy, or personal power is the first step. And the examples that she gives, and I'd like you to please read this article because it's very good. Examples of personal boundaries. She says, people may not go through my personal belongings, may not criticize me, make comments about my weight, take their anger out on me, humiliate me in front of others, tell off-color jokes in my company, invade my personal space. And she says, I have a right to ask for privacy, a new hairstyle from an old stylist, peace and quiet while getting a massage, help around the house, more information before making a purchase, and quiet time to myself. And to protect my time and energy, she says, it's okay to turn the ringer off the phone, take my time returning calls. It's perfectly okay for me to change my mind, and so on. So if you'd like to look at those, you'll find those quite useful. All right. In the booklet, if I can come back to it just for a second, the one page in the booklet that I really have touched on before is differentiating between people's response to things, the way in which they respond to things, either by being proactive or by being reactive. I think in a previous book I said there's a difference between reacting and responding. And reactive really is impulsive. If you react to something, then you're doing it on impulse, unconsidered. It's like automatic, unthought through. And it's rather like taking a can of Diet Coke or Coke and shaking it and then flipping the lid thing off and watching the result. Because what happens is if you're reactive, having shaken your soda pop up, it spurts out of the little hole at the top and goes everywhere. There's a massive explosion of emotion in terms of being reactive. If you think about a more considered response to something, we could call that being proactive. In other words, what we do is we remember what we've learned in our mindfulness training, and we're able to practice it by saying to ourselves, stop. So something happens, whatever the situation is, whether it's somebody says something offensive to you, or as I've given examples I've given to you in the past in the classroom, or when certain events occur in the classroom, which are really quite dramatic and serious, you can actually then say to yourself, stop, hang on a moment, stop, breathe. Where are my feet? Where are my feet? Come back into your body. Don't allow the emotion to take over inside your head. And then in that kind of way, the situation that you might find yourself in, where your boundaries are being pushed to the limit, rather than react angrily, you're able to give them far more considered response. And I think that's really important, and particularly for teachers in the classroom. So the methodology for enforcing and keeping boundaries is fairly simple then. First of all, we need to know ourselves. We need to know what we're prepared to put up with. And that does require intimate self-knowledge. Sit down and think through, what is it that you're prepared to put up with in all the various areas that we've already described, and what are you not prepared to put up with? And almost make a journal out of it, if you will. Sometimes enforcing our own boundaries can lead to conflict. And so I have in the booklet given you a page on that, on how to deal with conflict, where the exchange becomes uncomfortable with someone or even confrontational. And the technique I've already described, and I've described to you so many times, but you do need to practice it in a meditation sense frequently throughout the day, like 2 minutes, stop, 2 minutes, taking a breath for 3 in breaths and 3 out breaths. And using that strategy, and by bringing yourself back into your body, will enable you to see what the signs of your anger are, see them occurring, and by being aware of them and being able to breathe into them, you can become calmer, and your emotions are put back to a normal working state. If things get really out of hand, then sometimes it's a good practice simply to go for a walk. Just go for a walk around the garden. Just go for a walk up and down the street. And while you're doing that, concentrating on your body, concentrating on your feet, on the actual physical movement that you're making, concentrating on your hands, the way your arms move, the way your body is moving, the way your head moves in the rhythm of walking, being aware of what you see, what you hear. All of this can reduce the anger and the emotion that comes from a confrontation that occurs from an infringement of your boundaries. Sometimes it's a good idea to go and listen to some music. Music has a very calming effect. And then we have to be aware of how we communicate with people in terms of not crossing their boundaries. And I think sometimes we think about our own boundaries, but we don't think about other people's. And if we're expecting people to respect our boundaries, then we should just as well and equally be respectful of theirs. And I have a little mini mantra that I think is really important to use. And it's to do with the word think. T-H-I-N-K, think. So when something occurs, we stop. And if we want to say something in response to a situation where a boundary might be being infringed, or we might feel, oh my God, am I crossing their boundary? Then T, ask yourself, is it true? What I'm going to say to this person, before I say it, is it true? T. Secondly, H, is it helpful? Or is it simply just stirring up already disturbed waters? I, is it inspiring? Because I want to be the sort of person that inspires people, not puts them down. N, is it necessary to say this? Or would it be better if I didn't say anything? Is it necessary? And finally, K, is it kind? It's very, very important in relationships, whoever those relationships are with, whether they're professional relationships in the classroom or whether they're personal relationships at home and with our friends, that we actually are aware of what we say and the way in which we communicate. And I find think to be a very good way of keeping ourselves in check. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspirational? Is it necessary to say it? And is it kind? And I think that in all our relationships, we need to look very, very carefully at ourselves and our own generosity and generous spirit. And one of the ways in which to keep ourselves balanced in terms of our relationships with other people is to be aware of ourselves. Just be aware of what we say, be aware of what our intentions and our motives are in our relationships with other people. Sometimes we find that it's just as easy to go with the flow, go along with the crowd. Is that the right way always, though, to do things? At what point do you start to feel uncomfortable when you're going with the flow? When deep down inside you, you know that that's not how you would normally behave as an individual. And so we need to just remember that we need to be very mindfully aware. And boundaries are to do with being mindfully aware. And being mindfully aware in the present moment. Otherwise, we engage in careless, sometimes regrettable actions. So notice what you're about to do or say before doing or saying it. And that's being mindful. That is living mindfully. And you can then consider the effects of your actions and what they will be on other people before you allow the action to take place. Listen to your inner voice and respond to it. Okay, you might like to look at those documents now that are listed. And when you've done that, you need to pause the recording now. And once you've done that, come back to me for the final session on this, which is a meditation to set these boundaries in our minds. I'll see you in a moment. Okay, welcome back. This guided meditation is for helping you to build healthy and purposeful boundaries. First of all, make yourself comfortable. Make sure you're sitting up straight. When you make a healthy boundary for yourself, then things that sometimes have hurt you in the past won't be able to reach you anymore. Boundaries give to us by providing some life essentials. So let's begin just by breathing together. Take 5 deep breaths now with me to oxygenate your body and all of its systems. And as you feel the weight of your body and how it presses down, make sure that your spine is completely straight and your posture exudes that you are confident. Gently close your eyes, increasing your ability to focus. And as you breathe easily and gently, you feel safe and relaxed. My voice guiding you is like a beacon of light through the darkness. And I'm going to ask you to visualize. As the sun rises, you see you're standing in a beautiful, lush, green grass meadow. And there's a small house that you've built by hand in the middle of it. This house represents you and all the work that you've put into yourself. And the grass represents the world outside of you. You decide that it would be good to plant some trees and some shrubs so that those plants will aid in protecting you from harm, and they would also benefit the world. For example, a raspberry bush is very spiky and dense, yet it gives a bounty of fruits for us to enjoy and be nourished by. If you plant many of them in a row, they'll protect you, as well as a tall electric fence would. But this plant also gives. And it serves, therefore, 2 purposes. When you plant tall trees, they'll protect you from the harsh winds if they're placed in a way that's good through all the seasons. Tall trees supply us with the most oxygen, therefore they're giving, whilst they're also protecting. And the trees also serve other purposes here. You look at these beautiful life forces that you're planting on your land, and you notice they need a water source. So you find the lowest lying area and begin digging down and around, making the shape of a small pond. And as you step back from the circle of dirt you've created, you know that only a few heavy rains need to pour down, and it will begin to fill and turn into a natural source of water. And the pond serves many purposes on your land. It not only provides you and the wildlife with water, but it also gives you somewhere to go to meditate and reflect on the good things in your life and the good things that you do for others. Closer to your house, you see some vegetables and fruits. That's what you need them. So you create a garden that's easy for you to access and water when necessary. So you plant all the fruits you like and any kind of vegetables you need. Your garden flourishes and provides. All this garden needs from you is to be tended to. You look around and you see you need an orchard. So you strategically plant many apple trees and other fruiting trees right next to the protected area by the big tall trees and a little closer to the pond so that they can drink. And this orchard supplies you with the most delicious apples you've ever tasted, and their nutrients are off the charts. You look around your plot of land and you're proud. Not only do all these plants protect you and your home, but they give to you and the community around them. So make sure you work on the garden within you and put up proper barriers that, if planted well and with love and care, they will also give. So now you are protected and allowed to lead a happy life. And lastly, look again at your hand-built home and make any necessary changes to it. You're an excellent builder after all. Good job today. So that brings us to the end of this first part of our session on mindfulness. And you'll find soon there will be a second part, which is mindfulness in the classroom. And don't be afraid. This will simply be helping you to establish your professional boundaries and distinguishing between them, between your professional boundaries and your personal ones. So it's all good news. So thank you very much for being with me today, and I'll see you again very soon.